Hi, my name is Lila, and this is Ask Me Anything Vedic Astrology. A couple weeks ago, we went over the chart of someone so famous you'd have to be living under a rock to not know who it is. Today, we will reveal the name as being Queen Elizabeth II. So let's go over that chart today and see what's shaken with the Queen. She was born under the rising sign of Sagittarius, the 9th house of the zodiac. This means that the constellation of Sagittarius was rising on the eastern horizon at the time of her birth. This isn't to be confused with the Western astrology's sun sign that changes from month to month. Rising signs in Vedic astrology change approximately every 2 hours. Sagittarius rising in the ascendant gives this individual a magnificent personality and a very pleasant appearance. Let's see if we can highlight this for you. Here we go. Whoops. You can see Sagittarius, the 9th house right there. Sagittarians are diplomatic in nature. They believe in hard work and God. Most notably, they are very, very blessed with the ability to maintain composure. And they are also quite cautious. I think this sounds familiar. Before going out further, I'd like to point out that she was born at 28.37 degrees Sagittarius. You see that right there? 28.37. That means that rising sign, that degree is the most effective point in the chart. Any planet within 5 degrees of 28.37 gets extra credit. It gets extra strength. So we see right here we have 3 planets, I believe. Ketu, Rahu, which are always troublemakers, Mars, and Jupiter are all within 5 degrees of 28.37. In fact, they're all smack dab right on that point. So that gives them extra effectiveness in her chart, and we will go over that further. We have 12 houses of the zodiac, and so what we're going to do is look at the first house. It's owned by Jupiter, a diplomatic and very expansive planet. Jupiter owns Sagittarius. Here we are. Let me get that cursor. Jupiter is placed in the 2nd house. So she has the first house that indicates personality, health, longevity, and prosperity. Jupiter is a natural significator for husband, judgment, children. In this chart, it's placed in the 2nd house of bank account, continuity of family life, and status. This connects the 1st house of one's very self and prosperity with the 2nd house of bank account, continuity of family life, and status. And as we all know from having viewed the Queen's life, these two are very much intermingled. Mars is placed in the 2nd house of family life. Mars is right here at 28.02. Family life, bank account, and status. Again, this house is. Mars owns Aries. Aries, whoopee! Aries in the Queen's chart is the 5th house. The 5th house represents speculative investments, children, and wisdom. In this chart, Mars, which owns the 5th house, again, of investments, children, and wisdom, is placed in the 2nd house of family, bank account, and status. It is exalted when it's in Capricorn. 10th house of the zodiac, see the 10 there? 10th sign, my apologies. It's always exalted in the 10th sign. And because Mars and Jupiter are conjunct, these 2 planets have a strong and very positive effect on each other. You see how Mars is at 28.02, Jupiter's at 29.41. So these planets are egging each other on. And because Mars owns the 5th house of investments, children, and wisdom, and we have Jupiter owning her house of her very self, they are both strongly connected with status, family life, and bank account, and they are strengthening each other. Mars, well, one would expect a person with this configuration to have wealth, long life, and money from speculation, and to own vast real estate. As Mars is the planet of real estate, it is exalted in Capricorn. It's in the second house of bank account. So this is a really good placement. The real estate would ascend in value as not only is Mars exalted, but again, it's in the house of bank account. Mars is a male planet, owner of the 5th house of children. So guess what? She has male children. And I must say, even the female child that she has is more like a man than the rest of them. So it's almost as though she has 4 male children. This placement bestows male children upon her. Now Jupiter, which represents a person's very self, it owns the 1st house, again seated in the 2nd. It's on the most effective point. This combination can give one lucky windfalls through one's own efforts. And Mars, commander-in-chief of the planetary cabinet, is conjunct Jupiter, her planet of self. This would give the individual inherent qualities of commander-in-chief. We see Mars, commander-in-chief. Oh, gosh, it's just 1 degree away from Jupiter, which is her very self. Now, there is a caveat here, and that is Jupiter is debilitated when it's placed in Capricorn. 10th sign is Capricorn. Women with a debilitated Jupiter often end up with men who are not good husband material and who do not stick around. A debilitated planet in the 2nd house also gives rise to marital discord. Jupiter, unfortunately, although it is well placed in the 2nd house, is debilitated. So we would see discord, and I think we can all see from having known the history of Queen Elizabeth II's life, there has been a good deal of familial and marital discord. Now, regarding your spouse not being a good husband, what's interesting is they are married, and we'll get into why it's lasted so long later, but he has not been known. In many ways, he's not good husband material. There is a lot of talk about him stepping outside the marriage, and whether or not you believe that, he has a lot of inherent qualities of being a little bit off the program. He is known, if you don't live in England, for opening his mouth and saying things that people can't really believe. He even said, I remember one story of him visiting some British students who were on their way to China, and Prince Philip advised the students to not come back with little squinty eyes. This actually happened. He is renowned for making gaffes of this nature. The marriage has lasted a very long time, but one must admit that there have been many doubts, even within the family, that this man would make any sort of appropriate consort, and he has behaved for a good part of his life, off and on, in a very inappropriate manner. Now, let's go back to Mars. Mars owning Aries. Here we are. 5th house, investments and children, is placed in the 2nd house, again, of status and bank account. It would bestow the children with status in life, and it would bestow herself, the queen, with gains from investments, speculative investments. It also gives rise to great administrative skills, as Mars, again commander-in-chief of the planetary cabinet, is both exalted and placed at the most effective point. In other words, it's within 5 degrees where she was born, 28.37. So it would aspect Mars when it's on the most effective point. It aspects 4 houses away. 1, 2, 3, 4. It aspects its own house of speculative investments. 5, 6. It aspects also 7 and 8 houses away. So it would bring these qualities of investments and children and wisdom into the house of the 8th house, which is the house of marital bond, and the 9th house, which is the house of good luck, spiritual preceptor, and father. We'll get into that also. At the most effective point, it is casting blessings on the 8th house of marital bond, and it's also easy boons and gains. It gives her a father because it aspects the 9th house of father, gives herself a father who is exceptionally well-seated financially. Her father was the King of England. The particular placement of Mars also gives the person a meteoric rise in career. Now, when Queen Elizabeth was 25, I believe, suddenly and unexpectedly, her father died, and overnight she became Queen of the British Empire, which was a lot more of an empire back then than it is now. Now, the exaltation, let me see where my little notes are here. Okay, bear with me for a moment. Next we have the Sun. Sun owns Leo. Sun is right here. Leo is what we were talking about just a couple minutes ago. House of Father, spiritual preceptor, good luck, good fortune. Sun is the king of the planetary cabinet, and it's seated in its sign of exaltation, owns the house of good luck. This is the second most propitious sign in the entire zodiac, Leo. And it is exalted in the house of speculative investments, wisdom, children. This is a very good placement. It makes the Sun exceptionally strong. It brings the Sun's energies into that house. What happens is one is fortunate in life. One practices spiritual principles under the able guidance of one's father and spiritual preceptor. As we all know, she was very close to her father, and she remains very close to the spiritual preceptor, the Anglican Church of England. A strong and well-placed Sun confers name, fame, and evolution on the soul. It confers handsome gains in investments. Sun rules the financial strength of the father in this chart. See, it owns the house of the father. It's here in the investment house. So that would be very significant, the financial strength of the father in this chart. Venus is seated here in the third house. The third house is Aquarius, and Venus owns Libra, which in this chart is the 11th house of gains. Earned gains. This is earned income as opposed to unearned income. This is earned income, and it is also friends. It's seated in the third house. This is a good placement. It owns Aquarius. Aquarius is owned by Saturn. This strong Venus blesses the native with affluence and luxuries. Such individuals are often connected with the media, and they have mass appeal. As you can see, this has been very, very true with Queen Elizabeth II. Because Saturn, the owner of the third house, where Venus is seated, represents the masses, she would have gains from the masses who would also count her as their friend. And this seems also to be very true in her life. Now, next up, who do we have? We have Mercury right here. Now, this is interesting. Mercury owns the 10th house of gains. It's the 6th sign, Virgo. Mercury owns this house. It's seated in the 4th house of domestic peace and happiness and the physical home in the chart. However, Mercury is weak because Mercury is debilitated in Pisces. Pisces is the 12th sign of the zodiac. Mercury is always debilitated when it's in Pisces. In this case, it signifies many ups and downs in one's life, career, and, pay special attention, one suffers on account of the male child. Does this sound familiar? Mercury owns Virgo. In this chart, again, 10th house of career. It's a natural significator for business and communications. Its placement in the 4th house. Let's see, here we go. Let's get back here. Here we are. Its placement in the 4th house. Let me go back to where I was. It's the house of home and real estate. It connects business, communications, and career, which are the significations of Mercury. It connects that in the 4th house of home and real estate. So this person may hold business meetings at home and may end up holding significant real estate in conjunction with career. And the real estate that she does own, the vast portion of it is definitely connected with her career. They are castles, which are property of Great Britain. And she does hold all her business meetings in her home. She meets with the Prime Minister once a week. People come to her home, her castle, to meet with her. There may be problems with communications in the family, as the fourth house of domestic peace and happiness has this debilitated Mercury, which would mean debilitated communications. Mercury represents naturally significations. So you're going to have some debilitated communications. And I think we can all see from her life that, yes, there have been a lot of debilitated communications, quite unfortunately, within this family. Next we have Moon. Here's Moon, little baby Moon. Moon is the queen of the planetary cabinet. It is seated in the very tricky 8th house in this chart. See, it's the 8th house, 8th away from the house itself. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We have it. 8 is here. It's tricky because it is the house of easy gains, unearned income, windfalls, insurance settlements, inheritances, longevity, and marital bond. If well placed and unafflicted, it confers blessings. When badly placed, it can portend strong obstructions, death, severe setbacks, critical illnesses, and life's suffering. In this chart, the royal moon is placed in its own sign of Cancer. So it is very, very happy. This would give her immense peace of mind. It is comfortable in its own house. It bestows enormous blessings on the native. This individual would have substantial inheritance, easy gains, long life, winnings in lotteries, and gambling-like efforts. I think horses are gambling-like efforts. And a very well-established father, needless to say, he was the King of England. She would have a long life to see the sun, and a very long marriage, because this is the house of marital bond. So despite her husband being inappropriate husband material many times in his life, the marriage holds out because of the strength of Moon, seated in its own house of marital bond. Moon would bring out her feminine, nurturing, gentle, and considerate nature, and the Queen is, above all, we could see, very gentle and very considerate. The moon is also a natural significator for fame, fortune, and public regard, which she has in spades. Again, due to the moon being in its own sign, and very strong at 19 degrees, right in the midheaven. She would not have to strive to acquire status. With the owner of the 8th house in its own sign, people just give things to her. These individuals effortlessly acquire unearned boons and gains. The sun and the moon placement are extraordinary here, because there are only 8 days per year when both Moon, the queen of the planetary cabinet, and Sun, there we go, king of the planetary cabinet, are both either in their own sign or exalted. And on those 8 days, they are strong in degrees only 1/3 of the time. Now, statistically, that means that only 2 out of every 300 people would have this very strong planetary blessing of both Moon and Sun being either exalted or in their own sign. The contrary indication we have in this chart is a woman with a long-lasting marriage, but indications of a husband who does not stick around. So which is it? I once asked my own professor, David Hawthorne, this same question, and when I saw diametrically opposed indications in a chart. So what happens? I asked him. Which one occurs? Or do they cancel each other out? He replied, both. Both happen. So we can assume this individual has a long-lasting marriage with a husband who behaves inappropriately and who may step out. But as the husband planet, Jupiter, here we go, Jupiter, is seated smack dab in the house of continuity of family life, the second house, first house is the second house. I'd say he stays in the family, causing a little bit of discord along the way, as after all, Jupiter is debilitated. Now, placement of Saturn, Saturn's over here, Saturn's in the 12th house of losses. It owns the 3rd house of entrepreneurial ventures. That's Aquarius in this chart. It indicates strong obstructions and sudden setbacks in one's own initiative. So we can surmise this individual, the Queen, would not make a good entrepreneur, but as Saturn represents the masses, and the 12th house is also the house of life overseas, this individual may put a great deal of her initiatives into the masses overseas. And this is exactly what she does. Saturn, if you look carefully in this chart, does aspect the 11th house of income, as it is within 5 degrees of 28.37. Each house has 30 degrees. It's within 5 degrees of that point. So Saturn, though weak, would give income from the masses because it's aspecting. This is a little bit advanced. You might not understand it. It does aspect the 11th house of earned income. Now Rahu and Ketu, Rahu we have here, Ketu we have here, are not recognized by Western astrology. They are the north and south nodes of the moon, and they are very disruptive troublemakers. However, they're exalted in this chart. Rahu is the chart of ambition. It's placed in the 7th house. On the most effective point, it can give an overly ambitious marriage partner. I think we can agree that that is true. Prince Philip has been known for being overly ambitious since the beginning, wanting to make his own mark. Ketu in the 1st house of self, here we go, right here, can give a person a spiritual, withdrawn, and sometimes even shy nature. What is important to note here is that Rahu and Ketu are both on the most effective point and cast an aspect on the 1st house of self. Whoop, whoop, here we go. The 3rd house of one's own initiatives, the 5th house of children, 7th house of marriage, here we go, 9th house of good luck, and the 11th house of income. Friends. In Vedic astrology, we'd say the Queen has 6 houses on fire. This would give enormous challenges in life, despite all the boons and gains. Both Rahu and Ketu, troublemaking planets from the get-go, are smack dab on the most effective point. Rahu governs fears, phobias, death, and death-like experiences, and ambition. Ketu governs setbacks and disappointments. This individual's life, despite its enormous gifts, would be very, very difficult. However, the strength of the other very well-placed planets give her what we call protective cover, the ability to weather the vicissitudes gracefully and to simply carry on. We can safely say this individual is very, very wealthy. And she is the Queen of England. So here we have an example of a chart of someone who is enormously blessed with wealth over and over and over again, gains unearned income, but who has enormous problems in her life and ups and downs. I cannot emphasize enough the disruptive power of those last 2 planets that we just mentioned. This is the Queen of this is the chart of Queen Elizabeth II, and this is Lila. Ask Me Anything Vedic Astrology. Bye-bye until next time.